In this video, we're going to be taking a look at creating this little retail display. We do have plans available for this project at our $5plans.com. Additionally, if you are interested in this plan, if you leave a comment below with your email address, we do give out free sets of plans every single day. We just go through the comments, we pick out some winners, and we send you the plans and the 3D model for this project. So any of our projects on our YouTube channel, if you comment in underneath the video with your email address, say, hey, I'd like a free set of plans, we do pick out 10 winners every morning to give out free plans to. So with that said, with this particular project, because there are lots of dimensions and lots of critical dimensions to make this all work, I do think a set of plans will be handy for you to have. Now, certainly I'm going to do my best to give you all the dimensions as we go through and build this, but having an actual set of plans is probably going to be beneficial to you. All right, now this particular display is kind of meant to be a semi-permanent setup for this customer of ours, but they do want the ability to be able to take it apart and go to pop-up events and things as well, if they desire to at a later date. So we went through several different design iterations of this to come up with something that would be able to come apart fairly easily without tools, and so this is what we came up with. Okay, so this project requires 4 2x3s, and I was not able to find good clean 2x3s at my local lumberyard, so I went ahead and bought 2x4s, and so I'm going to rip my 2x4s down to 2x3s, which are 2.5 by 1.5 is what we'll wind up with. And so I'm going to take 4 2x4s, rip them to 2.5 inches wide, and then additionally we're going to need 3 fence pickets, and we are going to need the little trays here that we're going to make are 18 by 24 inches. So what I did is I bought a piece of 1/2 inch plywood, and I ripped me 18 inches wide, and then I cut them to 24-inch lengths, and we need 3 of those. And then the back here is going to be pegboard, and I bought one project panel at the local lumberyard. It's 2 foot by 4 foot, but it winds up we only need 18 inches tall by 24 inches wide. So you'll actually be able to get 2 displays out of one project panel by going that route. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is go ahead and get my pieces cut. So I'm going to rip my 2x4s down to 2x3s, 2.5 inches wide. This back one here, these back uprights are 72 inches tall. The front here, we're going to do a little bit differently than what the drawing shows. We're going to make these 45, and I'll explain why a little later. And then these 3 pieces on each side are 10 inches. So we need 6 10-inch pieces, 2 45-inch pieces, and 2 72-inch pieces. So we're going to go ahead and get those cut, and then we'll talk about how we're going to put those together. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and put 2 of the side assemblies together like we had previously discussed. What I did here is I've got one 45-inch piece, one 72-inch piece. I ripped down my 2x4 to 2.5 inches wide, and I measured up from the bottom 4 inches, 21 inches, and 37 3/4 inches. Okay, and so when we put these together, they are going to be, the dimensions are from the bottom of the board. So our bottom of our cross piece is going to go right on that dimension. So same thing here, we'll go to the bottom, and then our 37 3/4, we're going to go right to here. Now in the original drawing, we didn't have this little piece extending beyond this, okay? But the reason I ultimately decided to do that is because then we could hang something from this post. The individual who I'm making this display for, she sells all kinds of different things, and some of the things that she sells for is baskets and bags. And so I thought, well, she could hook a basket on there or hook a purse on there or a bag on this post to display one. So that's why I ultimately decided to just go a little bit taller to give her that option. Okay. So I am going to go ahead and put this together. Now, what I would recommend putting this together, I would recommend 3.5-inch screws. Now, if you didn't have 3.5-inch screws, you could use 2.5-inch screws, but would have to bury them a little bit in this wood. So these are 2.5 inches. So if we use 3.5, that would give us 1 inch into this board, but we'd probably bury it a little bit in here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take a 3/8-inch drill bit and just drill into this board 1 inch, and then that will leave 1.5 inches of the screw in this board, and then that would leave 2 inches into that board if we use 3.5-inch screws. If we use 2.5-inch screws, then that would give me 1.5 in this board, and give me 1 inch in that board. Okay, and ultimately I think that's the best course of action. I think I have enough 3.5-inch screws on hand to go ahead and use 3.5-inch screws. So I think that's what I'm going to be using for this. But 3.5 or 2.5, either one's acceptable. Okay, so I will go ahead and get one assembled to show you what it looks like, and then we'll work on getting the other one assembled. All right, so what I've gone ahead and done is I've used this little paper template I made that's in the templates, and that's just to get the exact hole locations just exactly right rather than just eyeball it. Certainly you could just eyeball it if you wanted to, but this is where I'm going to be drilling with my 3/8-inch drill bit 1 inch down. Okay, 1 inch down, and go ahead and be able to drill my screw locations before I put this together. That's an optional thing. You don't have to do that, but I just chose to go ahead and do that. All right, so we have our 2 frames built, and what I used was my pocket hole drill bit. It's 3/8 of an inch. It's razor sharp, cuts nice clean holes. Put a little piece of tape with paper there to mark my 1 inch point. So we use 3.5-inch screws, and you can see there are now in place. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put in all of the holes that are going to hold our shelves. Now we've got a bit of an issue here, and I think we're okay, but we're just going to have to be real mindful. So we've got our 2 screws here on every board, and the bolt that we're going to use to hold the 3 shelves is got to go right in between these 2 screws. So there's a 5/16 bolt that's going to go right through those 2. So we're just going to have to be real mindful of exactly where these are located so we can drill through here to go right in between those 2 screws. And that's one of the reasons why you want to use that little paper template to get those screw locations exactly right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drill my holes here in the position just on this first board, and then we have a set of holes that are going to have to be in basically the same exact location on the back side as well. All right, so I'm going to figure out exactly what those locations are, and then go ahead and drill those 3/8. We're going to use 3/8 holes, but we're using 5/16 hardware. Okay, so let me go ahead and get that done on both frames, and then we can move on to actually building our shelves that are going to go in here. All right, let's talk about what we did here. So we measured from the bottom up 5 1/4, 22 1/4, and then lastly 39. And we did that front and back, and you can see where that is roughly right in between our screw locations. So we should be okay. We should miss those screws on both sides and drill a 3/8 hole. X marks the spot right there. Now we do have some additional holes we have to make, because when the shelf is sitting flat, we're going to use this screw. But when the shelf is at an angle, we're going to have to use this screw up here. So I'm going to get all these in place and then calculate where those secondary screw locations have to be for those 3 angled shelves. So it's always going to pivot off of this front. But here we can interchange flat or at an angle. And obviously we're going to have to repeat that whole process on the other side frame as well. So we have all of those holes drilled, and we found the location of our next set of holes. And this will allow the shelf then to be at an angle if the customer so chooses. So we come up 4.5 inches from that previous hole location. So this previous hole location was at 5 1/4. So we come up, that makes that 9 3/4. That makes this one, this was 22 1/4. So we add 4.5 to that. That makes that 29 3/4. And then this one was at 39. So that makes that at 43 1/2. Okay. And again, we're coming in the 1 1/4 because this is 2.5 wide. And we'll go ahead and make those holes and then repeat that process exactly on the other side. In fact, we may even lay one on top of the other and just kind of mark the holes on the other one so they're exactly identical to this one. So let me go ahead and get that done, and then we'll take a look at making the trays that hold these 2 sides together. Ultimately, I was very pleased with that result. So I just laid the one on top of the other, then used the existing holes to mark all the locations on the second one. Now these are both identical, and that worked out real slick. So real satisfied there. So now I'm just going to give this all a light sand, deburr all the holes and so forth, take off all pencil marks if there are any, and then our next step will be building the trays, which we're gonna, the shelves, if you will, which we're gonna be building out of fence pickets and plywood. So let me go ahead and get all these cleaned up, and then I'll get all the material milled for the shelves, and then we'll talk about putting all that together. All right, so I've taken 2 fence pickets and ripped them to 2 inches wide, 2-inch wide strips, and then I've cut 6 pieces that are 16 3/4, and then 6 pieces that are 24 inches. And so the 6 3/4 are going to fit in between our 24-inch pieces, giving us a finished dimension of 18 inches. So it's going to be 24 by 18. And these fence pickets are 5/8 of an inch thick. So 2 of those are 1 1/4. And if you take 1 1/4 off of 18, these are 16 3/4. And that's why these are 16 3/4. Okay, so the actual dimension really doesn't matter too much as long as they're all the same. Okay, so in this case, 24, 16 3/4 is going to give us a finished dimension of 24 by 18. And so the plywood, I've cut 18 by 24, obviously. And I already have that cut from the other day, 1/2-inch plywood. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a little bit of wood glue and some staples, and we'll put that together, just little frames, 3 of them, to create those shelves there in the plants. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get that done, and then I will take a look at putting on our plywood bottoms. Before we put these together, these frames for our shelves, I am going to be using these large fender washers. Okay, and this could either go on the inside or the outside, but I'm going to put it together where these go on the inside. So what I'm going to do is take these 6 pieces. I've marked one. I'm going to cut or drill a 3/8 inch hole 1 inch back, and that will give us clearance for this big fender washer on the inside. And then once I have my first hole drilled in my first one, then I'm just going to go through and drill all of them the same way. So I'm going to use this as kind of a template for all the rest of them. But they're going to be 1 inch back, and because it's a 2-inch strip, I've marked it 1 inch up. My handy dandy Craig multi-mark here. So just have it set to 1 inch there and then 1 inch there. I'm going to drill my hole, then use this as the template for all the others. But just on one end. We don't need it on both ends, just one end for right now. All right, we have all 3 of our frames made now. And you can see that 1 inch hole is at the front, okay, of all 3 frames. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of glue on here. We'll go ahead and staple our plywood bottoms. We'll use 1 1/4 inch staples. And then we're ready to go ahead and take a look at the assembly of our shelves to our frames. We have a rear hole to drill back here, but we're going to do that a little bit differently once we kind of get this all put together, and I'll explain that here momentarily. We'll get it all set up. I'm going to get the plywood bottoms on first, and then we'll take a look at the assembly process. All right, we have the plywood on our first tray here, and so what we're going to do, I don't know if you can see this very well in the video, but see how that has just a little bit of an overlap there. Now, in a perfect world, we would take care of that with a flush trim bit on our handheld router. However, I do not have a flush trim bit, so I just use my planer, and that's probably why I don't have a flush trim bit, because I feel like this is just as easy, and I just haven't bought a flush trim bit yet. Plus, I don't like swapping out bits. So in my palm router, I have a 3/8 roundover, so I just leave that in there. I don't think I've ever taken it out of there since it's been in there. So anyhow, that's why I do that. So I'm just gonna use my planer and plane off the excess here. Those 2 sides don't really have an overlap. This side and this side do, and it's an easy fix with the planer. So hopefully you can see that now, nice and flush along that edge with that planer, and it just really makes short work of it. So if you don't have a flush trim bit, but you do have a hand plane, that's the way to take care of that. Nice, quick, and easy. So now I'll just repeat the process for the other 2. So now you can see after we have planed it, nice and smooth on those 2 sides perfectly. Okay. So now that we've got one done, we need to repeat the process twice more. All right, so let me show you kind of what we did. Is we've taken the hole that we drilled out in front and put a 2.5 inch bolt through, and on the back side we have a fender washer and a wing nut. I may ultimately switch those around, but this is just for the initial assembly. And then of course I used my carpenter square to make sure that the back was square, and then I used the existing hole to drill through and mark our hole here. Okay, so I'm going to do that for all 3 shelves, and then we'll rotate this shelf up, and then this will connect to, it should connect to that hole there. So we're gonna see, make sure it does before we go too much farther. But let me go ahead and get that done and see how that works out. So okay, so I had to think this through a little bit more and put my engineering cap on, because if we have a fixed distance from this bolt to this bolt, obviously the distance is going to be different than from this bolt to this bolt. So if we rotate this up, there's no way for that hole to align with this hole. Okay, so what that means is we're going to have to find the exact location of where this shelf should be as we rotate it up, and we're going to have to drill a second hole to line up with this hole. So I will go to the computer, figure out the exact measurements of where the top of this shelf should be at the angled point, mark that, and then move this shelf to that angle, and then drill another hole in this side piece. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do first maybe is get all 3 shelves in flat, and then we'll figure out where the angle dimension should be, and then we'll drill our second hole that way. Okay, so let me go ahead and get the rest of the shelves in place, and then we'll figure out our next step here. All right, so we have all of our initial positions in place. And of course, like I say, we just used our carpenter square to square up the backside, drilled the hole, then put in our 2.5-inch bolt. Now what we have to do is figure out, when this is at the angle, where does it come to up here to screw or drill that secondary bolt location if we want to keep these at an angle. Then of course I'll have to repeat this whole process to the other side as well. But let me first get those dimensions figured out on the computer, and then we'll transfer it here and we'll go ahead and drill those secondary holes. Okay, so I went to the computer, figured out exactly where these should be to give us our 20-degree angle. And so this first dimension is 11 3/8, and then the next dimension is 28 1/8, and then the next dimension is 45. But what I think I'm going to do right now is go ahead and put the other side on and drill the holes for it laying flat, and then we'll go ahead and take off and do our angled holes in the side of this. Okay, so that's what we're going to do right now, is we're going to go ahead and get this on the ground, put our other piece on top, drill our holes, and just kind of go from there. Well, now we can see our display is kind of starting to look like something. You can see on the other side we have the bolts going from the outside in, and ultimately that will be how I believe it would look. Customer can go from the inside out to the outside in, however they prefer. But now we have to do the back side. We've got one hole to drill, and you can see as I hold my carpenter square to the frame, that back corner has to come up a little bit. So we'll go ahead and pull that shelf up, drill the hole from the outside in, and then we'll make sure that these are all perfectly square and level to our frame. So we've got three corners done. Now we just need that last corner on each shelf, and that's how we'll get there. All right, so now you can kind of see what we've got going on down here. We've got all 3 corners in place. And then of course when we take our carpenter square here, make sure it's all nice and square front and back here. So now what I have to do is remove all of the back bolts on all 3 shelves. I'm going to go ahead and turn these around so they're coming from the outside to in, so our wing nut and washers on the inside as well on the front side, and then that will allow me then to pivot this shelf to a location, and then I could drill that. So I've already got the hole drilled here, but I can pivot the shelf up and then drill that secondary hole into the side that we can use when we want the shelves tilted. So that will be my next step. So you can see we have our top shelf at that 45-degree mark, connecting with this rail, if you will, on both sides. So now we can come in and drill our hole from the side, and that will hold this shelf at that 20-degree angle. Okay, and you can see our original hole is right there at the edge of the board, so that's definitely not going to work. So our new hole is going to be back behind that one just a little bit. So you can see I did go ahead and turn this front one around. So you got the wing nut facing out, now it's facing in. And so we're going to do that. If you wanted to, you wouldn't necessarily have to use wing nuts at the front. I'm going to look to see if I have stop nuts, because really this is a permanent pivot here. So we could just use a nut here and not use wing nuts, but wing nuts are fine as well, either way. But at any rate, that's what we're going to do on all the shelves. Line up to that mark, line up to that mark to get our 20-degree angle and drill our holes. And then I'm going to give it to the customer in this configuration with the angled shelves. So that's what they originally asked for. So, so at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and get that done for all 3 shelves, and then we'll show you what that looks like. All right, so our next step, we've measured up from the bottom all the way up here to 4'6", 54 inches. And then you can see I've marked it on the side and I've marked it on the inside as well. So that's going to be to the top of our shelf that we're going to build to put in here. Now our shelf is going to be held in place the same way with our 2.5 inch bolts with the wing nuts and the fender washers. So I'm out of them. I kind of forgot about having to mount the shelf in here, if I'm being honest. So I am going to go and get those, but also for our back panel, our piece of pegboard that we're going to be putting in here, we're going to have nut inserts. So a threaded insert here so we can thread in a bolt and a wing nut, okay? So while I'm at the hardware store, I'm going to go, I have nut inserts around here somewhere, but literally every time I need something, I can never find it. So I'm either going to look for the ones I have or go buy new ones, get some more bolts, and then we'll come back and talk about this shelf, and then finally that piece of pegboard, how we're going to mount that and get those inserts in place, those nut inserts in place, and then this one will basically be ready to go. So let me go ahead and get our shelf built, and then we'll talk about how we built that shelf, and then we'll kind of go from there. All right, so we do have our shelf mounted in place, and I want to just talk a little bit about the configuration of the shelf. So I made this shelf, so the distance, if you recall, our trays were 24 inches. So I made this shelf slightly smaller than that. And the reason for that is when our trays are mounted to our sides, we're doing that independently, where this has to fit in between something that already exists. So where our sides don't. So this I made 23 7/8. So we have a full width fence picket here. We glued it, we stapled it, okay? And then on the sides, this is the full depth of our fence picket. So this block is 5.5 inches long this way, but this way it's only 4, okay? And then of course we have our full width fence picket on top, and then we have a 2-inch lip on the front here. Now this is actually mounted backwards, now that I think about it, because we want this to face the front. But that's okay, we can get this switched around. We will have to drill another hole, but this is backwards. And the reason being is the customer wants to use this face to, she's gonna put chalk paint on here so she could switch out the pricing information, what have you. But I did make this box with this 2-inch lip so that we could turn the whole thing around, and if she wanted to use it. So this is the way she intends to use it. We're going to be putting a piece of pegboard on the back side here, but this way you could turn this and use it like a little box and this would have a lip that would hold the contents in place if that's how she wanted it. So so at any rate, so this hole that I drilled was for this application, but now we'll have to flip the whole thing over and flip it around and drill a secondary hole if you want to use it in the opposite direction. I know it's a little bit confusing, but trust me, we need two holes here, but I only have one so far. So we're going to take this back out, flip it around, and like the customer intended originally, but this just gives it another option if she decides to go that route. Okay, so let me go ahead and get that done, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do for our pegboard. Here's a better understanding of what I was talking about. So we have this secondary tray here, And the one thing is see how this it sits back here? Well, when we have our pegboard in place, the pegboard is going to hold that straight. So this shelf will only be able to be straight because there's kind of a backboard there. But we can tighten those down, and then you can see here, we've got a little box here where we can put some items in, and then this front lip will hold whatever we put in there, but also gives us some advertising. We could put pricing here, we could paint that with chalkboard paint too, and then we would have that option of being able to put pricing information or some kind of branding message or whatever. Okay, so that's what I was talking about. This is the alternate positioning of this shelf, and then we will turn it around, drill our secondary hole for the configuration that the customer requested. So I'll go ahead and get that done, and I'll show you what it looks like. So this is the orientation the customer intended. So we're going to have a little shelf here, and then again this is going to be painted with chalkboard paint, and then she'll be able to put some branding or some pricing information, and then we still have a piece of pegboard that's going to go across the back. I'm going to cut it down. The pegboard comes 2x4, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut it down to 22 inches. That'll bring us about the middle of this, and it'll attach to the back side of this. So we'll talk about how we're going to be able to take the pegboard on and off using some nutserts and some little threaded screw tabs. So we'll have to take a trip to the hardware store real quick and grab those pieces, and then we can talk about how we're going to utilize those. So I went to Lowe's and picked up our hardware that we need for the rest of our project. So we need these nutserts. These are installed with an Allen wrench, and I will go through and figure out what size drill bit we need to drill these out. And these thumb screws are 1/4 so they have they're 1/4 inch, and they have 20 threads per inch, which is a pretty common size. Now this hardware, if you go to Lowe's, you won't see, it's in those specialty metal drawers. So look for this type of hardware at Lowe's there. Now at Home Depot, this stuff is on the shelf in little bags. But at Lowe's, I've only found it in the specialty fasteners, those little metal trays that they have in the hardware aisle there. Okay, these are basically $1 for 2 of them, and these are $1 each, so they're kind of expensive, but it will allow us to put on our piece of pegboard and the shelf that's going to go across the top of the display. It'll allow us to take it on and off without tools, because we'll just be able to screw these in and out as necessary. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get our display set up, and we'll talk about exactly how these get inserted. I thought I would just show you real quick what I do with these nutserts, because they don't really tell you, they don't come with instructions or anything, so you almost have to just test it out. But I start small, so I take a drill bit that I think is roughly the size of the insert itself, not the threads, but the center insert, drill a sample hole, and see how easy it is to get started. You can see that the original one I picked out, I couldn't get it started very easily, so I moved up one drill bit, and then this one was I wouldn't say it was easy to start, but I did get it started fairly easily. And you want those threads to grip as good as you can, and I think it'll grip pretty easily, because this treated wood, I think, is just a little bit harder than our 2x4. I don't know, but it does work good, so we will go ahead and go with this one. And this drill bit worked out to be 21/64. So if you go buy this exact insert, You'll know that the 21/64 drill bit on softwoods like we're using with the pine here should work well for you, the 21/64. Okay, so now what we're going to do, go ahead and cut our pegboard where we need it, and then position it, and then we'll drill our holes for our nutserts. So let me go ahead and get my pegboard cut, and then we'll locate the holes that we're going to use to attach the pegboard to. So we have our first one in place. You can see there I drilled through my pegboard into my 2x4, and then we're going to use a thumb screw just to set that one in place, and then I'll go ahead and drill the holes for the rest of them. Okay, so we have all of our nutserts placed. We have all of our thumb screws in place now, and I just used a washer. I did not have any 1/4" washers, so I just used 5/16 flat washer, so that when we're tightening these down, we're not rubbing against the wood or whatever. So now that is properly secured. And now there's one last thing I want to do to this, is I want to put a shelf on top. I think it'll just add, make it look a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to go ahead and measure for that, cut that, and then we're going to put in 2 nutserts through the ends here with some thumb screws to hold that on as well. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get that done, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's all finished up. So what I did here was go ahead and take one more piece of fence picket. I've got an inch overhang here, and I got a staple in it right now, and then I'm going to go ahead and lay it down and put in my nutserts with my thumb screws, so this can be taken on and off if we need to dismantle this display at some point. So I'll go ahead and get that done, and then kind of show you the finished result. Well, there you have it, our finished display. Got our top on with our 2 thumb screws there. Those thumb screws were just long enough because they're 3/4 inch, and our board is 5/8. So probably could have swapped those out for 1-inch thumb screws, but they work. And we've got our pegboard there for all of the earrings and things that the customer is going to be selling and displaying. Now, this was a 2-foot by 4-foot project panel, and so there's enough of this pegboard left over to make a pegboard for the side that they could attach to the side of this. So I'll go ahead and frame that piece of pegboard out and give that to them as an option as well. But of course, it'll all come apart really super easy if they need to do an event and they need to pack it up and go. So there you go. So I hope you enjoyed this project. Hope it give you some ideas on how to create similar displays that you can take apart. Keep in mind, if you're interested in a free set of plans for this project, we give away free plans every morning. We go through the comments, and all you have to do is leave a comment and your email address in the comment, because we get a lot of comments, but we don't know who you are or where to send the plans to. So make sure you leave us your email address in the comment, and then we'll know where to send the plans out. So we give away free plans every morning. We go through the comments and we'll send you the plans for free. Otherwise, they're available for $5 on $5plans.com. So please do leave us a comment. It helps us with the YouTube algorithm, and let people know that we exist, and we can keep creating more content for you. So please do like and subscribe, and do leave us a comment, and thanks for watching.